Hi everybody and welcome to my very first video blog. I'm hoping it will be the first of many as I go on my journey and foray into the world of 8mm cameras. Why am I making a blog? You might ask, when there's a ton of really useful videos out there. There are a ton of really useful videos out there, but as with a lot of other people, this has been a really particularly rubbish year. And over the summer, basically I got back into 8mm cameras and tried to do some research, tried to learn more about things that I didn't already know, and basically there was a lot of stuff that I couldn't find information on. So as I learned things and used forums, I actually thought this could be a really good opportunity for me to obviously further my own knowledge of the subject, but also hopefully give something back as well. And they've got little tidbits that I picked up along the way, little things I've bought on eBay, etc, etc. So I just wanted to basically make a little video diary of everything that I've learned, and hopefully it can give something back as well. So what I would like to talk about today is the camera that I bought. It's not my first 8mm camera. I do have an old 1964 Bauer that was gifted to me a few years ago, but I'm here to talk specifically about the Canon 814 Auto Zoom electronic. This lovely baby was originally marketed in 1972 in Japan. Honestly, it's a wonderful piece of kit. I read a lot about the different cameras that you can get and good ones for beginners and whatnot. I am definitely not an expert when it comes to 8mm cameras or shooting in analog at all, for that matter. I do work in film personally, and I do deal a lot with stuff that was shot on analog, but I've never actually shot anything on analog before, other than my little Bauer 8mm, which really was for beginners. There really isn't that much you can do with it, like customizable. But what I particularly love about this model, and I'll go into in a minute, is how much control you can have over it without actually being blown away. It's a really cool piece of kit, and I've shot some test footage, which I'll show you at the end. Yeah, well, let's talk about the camera. But before I move on, what I will say, and it sounds really obvious, but you should also, whenever you pick up a camera like this, definitely get hold of the manual. If it doesn't come with one, there are sites out there that you can download them from. I'll put the link to this particular model at the bottom of the messages. It sounds really boring reading the manual, but actually this is the least boring thing I've ever read. There's lots of helpful pictures, and it gets straight to the point. It's not a wall of text. I know it's not really exposing very well on my screen, but not to be underestimated. But anyway, without further ado, let's take a closer look at the camera. Alright, well, let's jump right in. As it's already been introduced, this is the Canon Auto Zoom 814. I'll try and just blitz through some of the basic functionality of the camera and not overcook it on this one, just so you're not super bored with my first video. We'll start with this nice fat lens we have here. From my on-set photography experience, Canon have always made really good lenses, and this one, despite being from the 70s, is no different. It's a 7.5 to 60mm lens, zoom lens. Now, I know that sounds quite small, but obviously the numbers are relative to the 8mm film back, and equivalent to your DSLR is probably about somewhere around the 40mm mark to 300mm. So it's quite a big zoom. It's not necessarily as wide as I would like, but 300mm, there's a lot you can do with that, and you can get in really close. And also, talking of getting in close, it also comes with a macro lens, which you can engage by using this little M toggle you've got down here. And this enables you to get even closer, and I think the guide says you can get within a couple of centimeters of the object that you're filming, which is pretty impressive. I haven't used it myself yet, or at least I've tried without actually filming anything, but it's definitely something I'm gonna play around with. And then obviously you've got your nice chunky focus dial here. Cool, let's move on to the side panel, which is where all the magic happens. It's a lot less complicated than it looks. There's a lot of quite simple dials on here, a couple more complicated, but let's take a look. We have the on-off dial here. You can see it says off, and it comes with two functions. It has rolling and roll lock. Now this is actually one of the key functions that I was really interested in when buying this camera, and it's the roll lock function. Obviously if it's on roll, I can press the button and it's going to tick along, but having the roll lock function means I can actually press the button and keep it on. And the reason why that's handy is because if I've got it on a rig and I can't always reach the button, or it's really inconvenient for me to hold the button whilst also, say, focusing or crash zooming or something like that. But furthermore, which is really cool, is this remote. And it seems trivial, seems basic, but my lord, this is a masterstroke. I actually didn't realise, funny story, I didn't realise I had it. I didn't think it came with the package, but basically the bag that it came in its original leather bag, was sat on the side, and my son pulled it off the table. Luckily there was nothing in it, or so I thought, but the base of the bag fell out, and along with it came a really ancient cartridge of Super 8 film and this remote with a nice tidy little elastic band around it. And this is really a masterstroke, because when I'm in roll lock like this, I have full control over it, of the rolling, and obviously you can lock it and kick it back up again, which means again I can hold my rig and I don't have to worry about the button. It's really, really handy. I'll just switch that back off. Moving along to the left here, we have the exposure button. This is another key function for me. This is obviously hooked up to a automatic light meter, so you know, if you're moving around, the light meter will adjust your aperture for you. But also, if you pop it out, you get control over manual exposure, which is really good if you're filming narrative pieces and you don't want that aperture breathing in and out. And you get that aperture change just going up and down, that will prevent that from happening, because obviously it's a locked aperture setting, which is really cool. We also have the frame rate up here. We have the more classic 18 frames per second, which is more associated with 8mm film. That means you'll get about 3.5 minutes of footage on your film. And 24 frames per second is much more natural looking and what we're more used to seeing in cinema. And it'll look a little bit less steppy. I find sometimes watching things in 18 frames per second, it makes things look a little bit like my father-in-law has still got the sharpening setting on his telly, which he does. Terry, you need to fix that. But then you also have this really cool setting here, which is single shot function, which is really cool. You can take some happy snaps, some behind the scenes footage as you go along. Quite a cool little bonus you get there. And then we have another semi-unusual thing that you get on a Super 8 camera, is a slow motion button. So if I'm not in single shoot mode. If I hold the trigger down and then hold this, you can hear that speeding up. So that's obviously the motor kicking in and firing the film through the camera a lot quicker, which means then if I then play it back at 24 frames per second, it will obviously be at slow motion. That's a really cool function, and I imagine it was quite new for the time. So yeah, quite a cool thing. I haven't experimented with it too much, but it's definitely something I'm going to carry on using. Then we have this here. This combination here is for the variable shutter angle. It is a little bit confusing at first. I did have to read the manual a few times to get my head around it. But basically with a combination of these things, the 2 and the 4 mean basically it adjusts the angle of the shutter, so effectively lets less light in. A 2 will mean half of what you have it set currently from this, and 4 means half again. So you're effectively giving it a filter when it doesn't have one, because you're letting in less light, therefore making it darker. What it does allow you to do, which I guess is the coolest part of it, is by sliding this down, enables you to fade to black. Now this is cool, but we're now in a digital age, and it's obviously a lot more forgiving if you don't do that and then you do your fade in post, because then you can change it. Once you've done this, obviously you're locked into it, and that would scare me a little bit. So good to know, but I probably will be leaving this function on open, and actually for good measure there's a little lock button there, so I can't lock it. Cool. So moving on to this little function here, this little window. This is a frame counter, and you could see it when I was clicking along. You can count frames. that's literally all it does. You can change this dial here to move your marker, your red marker, but ultimately that's kind of the purpose it serves. You can use it however you like. I personally haven't found a use for it yet, but it's there if you need it. Then we have this one here, the film gauge meter. That is very important. That obviously counts the film going through the camera. It's not an exact measurement, but it's close enough and will give you a good indicator of certainly when you're getting close to your 50 feet there. You also have a light inside the viewer which is kind of hooked up to this, that when it gets close to that, the red light comes on. Then it's a case of, if you know the difference between the sound of when it's rolling film through it and not, you know it's run out of film, or you can take the film out and actually look to see if it's finished. But one thing to note with that, if you're going to take that approach, is this will reset the second you take the cartridge out. There's no going back, so you would have to put a mark. You'd have to remember where it was on here, put a little mark on the film, maybe write on it, and put it back in. Otherwise you'll lose your place, and it's still a bit risky. I'd say unless you know what you're doing, that's something I would avoid, just in case. Then you have this little hole here actually, basically just has a little white dot on it. If you're buying a new camera and you roll the footage, there's a little white dot in there that rotates, and that means the motor is working, so that's something to look out for. That's a good indicator of whether the camera's working or not. And we have the battery power gauge here, the battery meter. If you hold the red button, there's a little dial in there that pops left and right. There's blue on the left, red on the right. Blue means you've got enough energy for your shoot, red means you need to pay a visit to the Duracell bunny. But that's a cool little function as well, because you definitely don't want to be, you know, copping out or the motor not running at full capacity. Then we have a little pocket here for a synchronized flash function. Again, something I haven't explored yet. Probably won't, but who knows, might in the future. And then obviously the socket here for the remote control. On top here, before we go too far on, is this little red nugget which unscrews. This is the socket for the CCA filter cancellation. So what the CCA filter is, in a nutshell, I'll cover it in more detail in another video, is it's a tungsten filter that sits just behind the lens here. And basically that changes the temperature of what you're filming depending on the film stock that you're using, because Super 8 film predominantly, and 8mm film in general, always has a tungsten balance, or usually has a tungsten balance until the later daylight stocks came in. Sometimes you need to put the filter in front of it to almost counterbalance the footage, so it doesn't end up being too cool, etc, etc, or you remove it so it's not too warm. It can get a bit complicated, but once you understand it, it makes sense, and hopefully I'll go over it in more detail in another video. Moving on to the viewfinder here. So that's your basic viewfinder. I actually find these really difficult to use. You have to have your eye perfectly lined up. You move it to the left or right a little bit, your eyelashes start getting in the way. So it's not the easiest thing to use for long periods of time, but there's a little grid inside when you look through, and and this ring here actually turns, and the first thing you want to do is look at a blank wall like this, and get that grid pin sharp. That means the viewfinder is tuned to your eye. It's like wearing glasses that weren't made for you. If you can't see the thing pin sharp, then you will never get anything pin sharp, because you just won't be able to see it properly, basically. So that's a good thing to set up. Now the ring itself is actually a little bit stiff, so you can't knock it easily. Once you set it, you're kind of good to leave it for a while, but it is something worth checking now and again, especially if you've got friends and stuff picking up your camera. You never know when they're going to start fiddling around with stuff. So that's the viewfinder. We also have this button here, and this just releases the film cartridge compartment. Not much to say about this. You just cram your cartridge in there literally, and away you go. One interesting thing about this though is some older cameras have a little nozzle on the side, normally on this side, for the ASA setting of the film. Now this camera does it automatically. It reads the grooves on the side of the cartridge and actually just does it for you. So all you really need to focus about or think about is your aperture setting and your filters if you have any. So that's quite cool. But also, while I remember actually about this actually should come with a little cover. Obviously it's quite old, and that would have been one of the first things to get lost. but that's a way of letting in light. So if you're filming stuff, like you set it up on a tripod and you're not actually looking through the viewfinder, then you want to cover that up because you will bleed light into it. I don't actually know what the damage is because I've never done it, but it's just something to bear in mind. And then moving over to the side, it obviously wouldn't be the Auto Zoom camera that it says here if it didn't have an Auto Zoom. And here it is, wide, telescopic. It's quite a good speed. It's definitely not a crash zoom, but it's also not too slow, so you can get some interesting effects from it. I believe also from my reading, this was actually the first electronic zoom camera of its kind. Who knew? And it still holds up beautifully today. It just makes you think that this camera's nearly 50 years old, or could be nearly 50 years old, and it's still, bar the leather smelling a little bit, it's in incredible condition, which I really appreciate the person who owned this taking good care of it, and I will do the same. Then we have the release button here for the handle. Releases the handle. It actually locks in when it's fully open, but it's currently on this retro desktop tripod. See, Dad, I told you I'd find a use for it. But this is also where the batteries are held, and you can see there's a little logo down here to show you how the batteries go in. Pretty much what it says on the tin. It takes 4 AA batteries. Unlike some other cameras, it doesn't require an extra battery for the light meter, in which case I would do exactly what I haven't done here, and I would keep it always in off position. I mean, obviously just leaving it on my desk is fine, but if you put it away, I personally take the batteries out to avoid getting any corrosion if I was to forget that I left them in there. But also the light meter is always trying to read, so it's always just chipping away at your batteries. So keep it off and the light meter will turn off as well. But yeah, I believe that's it. That's the Canon Auto Zoom 814 electronic. Cool, well I hope that was helpful, and if you stay on to the end of the video, I've put a couple of snippets together on all the stocks actually, 50D, 200T and 500T. I really tried to put the camera through its paces, and I've put a couple of bits together at the end so you can see the type of quality that this camera can kick out. But yeah, I hope that was helpful. We'll be doing more videos as I go along, little tips and bits I've picked up along the way, and also things that have broken and how I've gone about fixing them, etc, etc. So yeah, if you did like it, the video, and it was helpful, I think this is around the time I'm supposed to ask you to like it or subscribe or something. I feel weird asking that, but if you want to do that, feel free. But cool, stay tuned, and hopefully I'll be back soon with another video.